So let's see what we can find on the thrift store shelves. And these boxes, these little canisters with these apples just caught my eye. They're definitely in good shape, so I think these need to come with me. And then right below it, with all the apples on the shelf, somebody must have turned in their apple collection, is this brand new paint can, and I love to make over these. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Yvonne from Ginger Chick Rehab. I am so glad to have you visiting, checking out what I am up to today. So in today's video, I am collabing with Lianep on DIY Beauty on Purpose. If you have not checked out her channel link will be down in my description box along with what she did. And what we're doing, we are doing thrifted farmhouse makeovers. And hey, that is right up my alley if you're a regular viewer to our channel. I love to thrift. I love to make over thrifted items, and it definitely goes into the farmhouse theme that I love. I shared with you the canister set. Definitely the apples are out, but it's a nice wooden box canister set. It's got some good storage inside. It still has a good seal. Same with this one. Good inside, good seal, and then $8.09 for the two of them. And then also I ran across this little $2.09. You can buy these unused because I would never take the time to clean out all my paint cans because they're always a hot mess. But for $2.09, I'm super excited. I've done paint cans over. They're just a nice extra way to do some decorative storage. Now the next item, I did find what I was thrifting, but not on this trip. So they were in my last thrift haul, and they are some trays. So they definitely got that summer vibe going on, but it was a set of 3, and they were all differently priced, $3.09, $4.09, and $5.09. But I just love the simplicity of the style of these, so I'm going to be making them over to fit into the farmhouse theme that I love and that resells well for me. First off, I'm going to get this paint can all cleaned up with just some Dawn dish soap and some hot water. Now after my can is all washed and it's dry, it's time to go in and give it a base coat. So I'm going in with some black Rust-Oleum, the Farm Implements spray paint. And if this is the first time you're checking out our channel, oh my goodness, yes, I do put my small items on a turntable. That way I can spin them around and get that 360 of spray. Vision for this paint can is to make it look like a vintage crock. I know it's a paint can, but we're going to make it look like a crock. So I'm going in with some of the Dixie Belle buttercream paint, and I'm doing a texture paint where you mix half and half paint to baking soda. And yes, I do use a turntable when I'm hand painting the items. Also, it just makes the job easier. So what this texture paint is going to do, it's going to give it that pottery type of look. So it's going to be a texture. You're going to have a little bit more girth to your paint. It's not just going to look like a painted item. So I am a fan of these fan brushes. Oh my gosh, especially when it comes to making my paint on an item very nice and smooth. The bristles are nice and soft. And then when I'm going in for that detail around the lip of this can. And then I'll go around very gingerly when it comes to that handle. I'm not worried about any of the paint, right? If I accidentally get it on the handle or on the edge, we can come back and clean that up later. So as I'm doing a round object with texture paint, I definitely want to make sure that I'm going in the same direction. It'll definitely give it more of that pottery look if you do. Now after I get it all painted, I want to do a once over to make sure there isn't any paint buildup in one certain area. It's a textured paint. You got some baking soda. The baking soda does poof a little bit, so I want to make sure the paint job is nice and smooth. Yeah, not smooth to the touch, smooth to the eye. So if you're wondering why I spray painted it black underneath, is because it gives that paint something to grab onto, especially when it comes to metal. So now that I'm going into my second coat, now that my first coat is thoroughly dry, all I'm doing is mixing up a little bit more paint in with what I had left of the texture paint. I don't need to add any more baking soda. There's plenty of texture on here. I just need to get a second coat on to make sure that it's thoroughly covered. Do you all keep a wet cloth or a box of Clorox wipes or anything like that next to you? I always have something wet just in case I need to clean something off. So I'm just going to double check my rim, my handle, and make sure that I didn't accidentally get any paint on it. Now that we have it all painted, I'm going to go in and give it some texture, a little bit more texture. So I'm going to be using some antiquing wax and some white wax by Waverly. So to take this plain paint job, I'm just going to elevate its level just a little bit by adding some of that antiquing wax around the bottom and then blending it in to make it look more like it is a stone pottery piece. And now I'm going to go in with that white wax and start blending this up, fading it up so it just kind of looks like it's just brown at the bottom and giving that, toning down that very bright of the paint. So now what we did, we just added a little bit more interest to this paint job. Go ahead and stencil the front of this, and I'm going to use the JRV stencils. She has crockery stencils, so I just picked out one of the forms and I actually made pictures of it so I know what the clear sheet looks like and if it's going to be size appropriate for the item that I am going to be stenciling on. Now, because of the wax that I put on this tape doesn't necessarily want to stick, but I just need something to hold it into place. So now I'm just going to be using the Apple Barrel multi-use black paint, the JRV stencil brush to apply my paint color. And I'm definitely going to still be holding onto my stencil just to make sure that it's laying nice and flat. And we're going to do that dry brush technique where there's not a lot of paint on your brush and just light swirling. You don't want to push down. You just want to let the bristles do what the bristle does when you have paint on them and get them into those little stenciled out areas. Want to seal and protect my paint, especially my stencil color. I'm going in with some polycrylic, and yes, you can spray top coat over wax, especially when it's dried. For my next project, it is these canister sets, and I am super excited because when I was going to take my seals off and start taking my tags and my tape and all that the liners came out. Anytime I don't have to tape around something like that, I was so happy. And again, if you're new to our channel, this is something I try to take anything apart that I possibly can. So the liners, the seals, I do not want to paint into that. And then I am also one of those that removes any price tag, any store stickers, any tags. I just do not like to paint over tags. You're flipping a thrifted item, it is very important to get it all cleaned up, not only removing the tags, separating pieces and parts, but going in with some hot water, some good cleaner, and I like Superclean in hot water, and get these pieces thoroughly wiped down. Now these are in great shape, so I don't need to do any sanding on these, which is a plus. So now I'm back in my spray room because I'm going to be spraying these with black. So I use the Black Onyx Ready to Use paint from Walmart, not that you can see that label, and my TrueCoat handheld sprayer. We do a lot of thrift lifts here on our channel, so I definitely is a blessing to invest in a sprayer. Using a sprayer, they suggest that you water down your paint to a 10%. What I do is I just make sure that as I'm stirring it up and I'm adding my water, that when I lift up my paint stirrer itself, that the paint is not laying on top of the other paint. When I lift that up, that paint should be totally immersed and just become one with the other paint. That I have my sprayer all ready. Yes, I did tape off. I didn't see any need to paint the inside of this box, so I just went ahead with some tape and taped it off. Now, this did have a textured look to the front of that apple, but it was actually smooth to the touch, so I didn't feel the need to fill it in or sand it off. But when I am using my sprayer, I don't want you to think that I just hooked the sprayer up just for this little canister set. When I'm doing thrifted items, I'm doing a good size grouping of them, making multiple videos for you all to see. And the spray paint I use is in the flat sheen, which is nice to use because you can tell when it is dry because it is not shiny anymore. And now after that is dry, the first coat is dry, I flip them over and I get the rest of the surface area that I did not get with that first coat. And then after my second coat is dry, I go in and I seal my black coat in using some polycrylic spray. Now what's this doing? I'm going to be leaving the top of this canister set black, but this is going to be the undercoat because I'm probably going to be distressing at the end. I wanted to make sure that I had a good paint and that this paint is going to be on there for longevity. Now to give a little bit of color to this canister set, I'm going to go ahead and use some Waverly Mineral Chalk Paint. Definitely the nice thing about this canister set is it has these nice stopping ports. So around the middle where I'm going to be putting a label, I'm just going to stop at that. And then at the bottom it has that same little lip on it that I'll just stop at that bottom. I'll just cover that up. And then when I remove the tape, I'll go back in and touch any of that up also. But yes, it's kind of nice that sometimes an object tells you where you should stop painting it. So now while that is drying, I'm going to go ahead and work on the lids. So now when it comes to the lids, I like to distress my pieces. That just gives them that worn, aged look that they've always been around, but it's kind of more of a uniform. So I'm going to go ahead and take a 220 sandpaper around all these sharp edges, all these corners, and just sand it down to that wood. Next, I'm going to go in with some fine grit steel wool and just thoroughly make sure that my piece is nice and smooth, removing some of that shiny. I don't know why the polycrylic, no matter what sheen you get, it always looks a little bit on the shiny side. So not only does that steel wool help get that shiny off, but it also opens up that polycrylic to be able to accept this brown antiquing wax that I use from Waverly. And I definitely love to finish off a lot of my black items with the antiquing wax. One, it makes that wood pop that I sanded down to, and two, it just richens up this black paint. After applying my second coat of paint and waiting for it to dry, now I'm going in with some sandpaper, and I'm not necessarily distressing the edges. I just want to make sure that my surface area is nice and smooth. Taking the time to spray this black helps it so that when I'm going on with this lighter color like this and the paint is not absorbing it in, it really does save time by undercoating items black. Now that I've got that all sanded smooth, I'll go ahead and remove that tape on the top. There's always, when you're taping off, you always get that hard, crusty edge that I guess it's one of my pet peeves, that after I take that tape off, I take that sandpaper again, get that hard, crusty edge where that paint has built up along the tape, and then sand that off, and then I'm going to go ahead and touch up this area, just that little lip, with that mineral paint. There's so many ways that you can make a label, but for this one I had inspiration. I do a lot of Pinterest, TikTok, a lot of searches to see what vintage canister sets look like. All I did was go in and center my lettering on a piece of paper. Now this is paper that I get off Amazon. It's just vintage looking paper. And I just did a couple different fonts, just what I thought would be a nice label for this canister set. So what I'm doing now is I'm trying to figure out how to center it into this spot. So I figured out the best of my way to do this was just to eyeball it centered, put some crinkle marks on the paper, and just cut it off with scissors. I know that I did not completely make straight cuts, that it doesn't necessarily fit, but I just needed to get the general size because I'm going to go back in with my little mouse sander and just use the tip of the sander just to distress the edges of this piece of paper. So that'll hide the multiple sins of where I did not cut this completely the right size or the right shape. Distressing those edges definitely hides that imperfectly of my cutting abilities on this paper, but it also gives that distressing that I am going to finish up these canisters with. So yes, this is very similar to the first piece that I did. I absolutely love doing this. It just gives it that aged look. So antiquing wax, a white wax. So the same effect of where I go around the bottom, I put that dark antiquing wax in, I blend it up with my white wax, and then it's definitely going to transform this color into matching that paper a little bit more. Now we need to attach our labels on, so I'm just going to be using some Mod Podge to attach them, just putting a nice thin, trying to make an even coat so that I can apply the label on top of it. And now that that has dried, I'm going to go in and now I'm going to take care of where I distress those edges, and you can see that really white of the paper. So I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of that black paint and I'm just going to shadow it in. I'm just going to kind of blend it in. It makes it look like it's been worn, maybe a little bit on the burned side. And I'm going to layer a little bit of brown on top of that, the antiquing wax and the white wax, and that'll definitely tie this label in. And you can just see how adding those waxes transform this paint to match that label a little bit better. And now to seal that label in, put a nice coating on it along with the rest of the containers. I'm just sealing them in with that polycrylic. Now for my third grouping, yep, we're getting to the trays. So first off, I've got to remove all these Goodwill tags. And then I'm going to go in and get them cleaned up with some Superclean and some hot water, trying to wipe down all. You want to get that prep surface. You don't know if there's any oil, any cleaning area, anything that would prevent your paint from sticking. Even on your small items, it's just as important to get them cleaned up, especially since a lot of mine are thrift store finds. So now you want to make sure that these are good and dry before moving on to getting the undercoat of spray paint. And sometimes when I'm going from object to object, I need to reprime my sprayer. What I'm doing is getting the air out of it so that it sprays. That happens. I don't want everybody to think like, oh, it just sprays smooth all the time. Sometimes you have to reprime it, get some air out of that bag, and continue on to spraying. But for me, the sprayer is well worth it, because if I had to hand paint it, I definitely would not be able to get it as smooth as what the sprayer does. And we, after showing our videos to you all here on YouTube, we actually have 2 retail booths in a local antique mall. So keeping this stocked, there's a lot of items that we need to get done to keep a booth stocked. Now that I've got that one surface area covered, I can flip them over after it's dry. There again, when it's not shiny anymore, I know that it's dry, and I can completely finish painting the rest of the surface area. This black onyx paint, this ready-to-use paint from Walmart, it gives some great coverage, and as you see, it's definitely covering up the original images on these trays. Just like previously, I'm going to seal this black spray paint in with some polycrylic. This way, when I go to distress, there's some distressing that I'm going to be doing on these trays. I want to see that black. So this is going to seal in that paint and make sure that it stays put. Now, if I did not seal these in, when I went to sand it, I would just go down to that natural color that it was. I've cleaned my sprayer all out. It's a little bit of a process, but it is well worth it. Now I've switched over to Kills Paint and Primer. This is also a ready-to-use paint. off of the shelf from Walmart. We have used it forever. It's a nice soft white. It's not that bright white, almost has a little bit of cream. So for these trays, the same thing. I'm going to spray the one side, let that dry, spray the other side, and because I've done that base coat of black, it's going to go ahead and only have to have 2 coats of white to get that to cover. And if you paint a lot with white, you know sometimes when you're trying to cover up an image and you have not undercoated it takes multiple coats to get white to cover. That's why I am a fan of taking the time to do that black. I always like to share any problems that need to be solved as arising when we're doing items. So as I have my second coat of white, as it was drying, it still did not cover up. The original lettering was bleeding through because that sometimes happens. To solve that problem, just some shellac spray. So what this does, this will actually seal it in. Even though the Kills has paint and primer both in it, it still does not stop this bleed through from happening. So I always recommend having some shellac on hand because as you see, that's what it looks like after I sprayed it. I've solved that problem and now we can finish up these trays. Now that that's dry, I can finally go in and sand these. So that 220 sandpaper is usually my go-to for sanding. And now depending on how hard you push your hand down, if you push down your hand too hard when you are sanding, you're going to get down to that original color. So just some gentle sand, let the sandpaper do its job. Oh my gosh, this is what I loved about this tray, that it had multiple little areas along the sides to be able to distress. And then now to make sure that this piece is nice and smooth, I'm just going to run that 220 sandpaper over the rest of the entire piece to make sure that there's no texture. Even though that sprayer does a wonderful job, I still want to make sure that everything is nice and smooth. To add some detail to the inside of these trays, we're going to Graphics Fairy. And if you are new to Graphics Fairy, she has free downloads that are printable. And she already has the reverse images so that we can print these out and have an image on the inside of these trays. So you just pick out what image you want, you download it to your computer, and then for me, I have a Mac, so when I get it downloaded to my computer, I need to copy and paste it and put it into my Excel program so that I can size it appropriate to each one of the trays that I'm going to be transferring the image onto. And I definitely always like to do a print preview to make sure that it is spaced appropriate. So I'm going to go ahead and get all 3 of mine printed out because we're going to be doing a Mod Podge on the bottom of these trays with the reversed image. As you see here, I just cut down to as close to the image that I possibly can without cutting into the image. Now I have an inkjet printer, so all I'm doing is printing these out on copier paper. Now I have Mod Podge, I just put it in a bowl, just easier for me to use my paintbrush. And then, yep, I'm just putting a nice thin layer of Mod Podge down on the bottom of the tray where I'm just kind of guesstimating where my image is going to go. So just evening it out, and then I will go ahead and put that image down, and then making sure that I'm, especially on my inked areas where it has been printed, I want to make sure that I have it good and flat and that I'm rubbing it into that Mod Podge. So I'll be doing the same thing on all 3 trays, putting a layer of Mod Podge down, putting that image. That's why you want it to be reversed, so you're doing it so that the ink is on top of that Mod Podge. And for these bigger pieces of paper, I'm going in with just my Cricut scraping tool just to make sure that I'm kind of smushing out any excess of that glue substance that might be a little too much here and there. I'll go around the sides with just a wet wipe and remove any of the excess off. Now for my larger tray, I'm going to go ahead and start doing one side and then do the other when I'm going to put the Mod Podge down. That way I can just keep this centered. Then we'll set all 3 trays over to the side and let them thoroughly dry overnight. And now it's time to remove the paper. So I just take a little bit of water, just a wet wipe, and I start moistening that paper. Now that I had a little bit of time to sit, now I can go ahead and go in with my fingers and start rubbing off that copier paper, and it should just leave your image. Now mine, because I'm an inkjet and not a laser, as you see, it'll start doing, you might get a little bit of bleeding of the ink, but don't stress, it will be okay. As I'm rubbing it off, I'm just go ahead and dump off my little whatever's left onto my mat, and then I can go back in and I can clean it up using that wet wipe. That's why I said don't stress. And I don't care that it may not be as dark of an image. I like it to look like that aged. So yep, just going in gingerly, cleaning up any of that ink that was bleeding. And yes, sometimes you still see that outline of where the paper is, but as it dries, it fades. And here's one of those work smarter, not harder. After all that rubbing, my fingers were getting a little bit sore. So as I'm looking at eyeballing my scraping tool, I'm like, I wonder if this would work. And this is actually the first time I attempted to use the scraping tool. And it does. And with my inkjet printer, it doesn't seem to cause as much of that bleeding that was happening. I made sure that my trays were good and dry before moving on, and I want to add a little bit of green sack striping to these trays. I definitely love the image transfers. Oh my goodness, they're so super cute. Definitely that French country farmhouse kind of feel. So now when it comes to green sack striping, if you are new to my channel, I absolutely love to add this detail when I can. So what I'm doing here is I just have a regular piece of masking tape, and I'm going to be working from the outer handle in that way that I can make sure that my stripes are staying centered. Now here's where you can have fun. You can make your stripes as big, as little, as many, as few as you want. So I just want 2 simple stripes, just accentuating. I don't want them to be taken away from this beautiful sheep. So all I'm doing here is I am just guesstimating a little 1/4 of an inch stripe that I want to put on either side. And the area that does not have the tape is where my color is going to go. To add color, I'm just going to be using my IOD black ink and a makeup sponge from the Dollar Tree. I'm trying to use these makeup sponges over these that they had a batch that was so thin, so as I'm inking, it's going to go right through the sponge right onto my finger. It'll be okay. My hands are washable. So what I like about doing an ink instead of doing paint is that this is going to match that image a little bit better, not be as dark what a paint would. Want to add one more stripe, so what I'm doing here is I just use the masking tape from the Dollar Tree store. I like that I can see through masking tape. So what I'm doing now is I'm eyeballing, as you see, I'm overlapping the tape, covering up that original stripe. I'm giving myself the same spacing in between what is unpainted, and then I have a roll of 1/2 inch masking tape, and I'm going to go ahead and butt that up against that original piece of masking tape, and then I'm going to do another piece of masking tape on the other side of it, and then I'm going to remove that middle 1/2 inch piece, and that is where my next color is going to go. And I'm going to add a couple more stripes just to this little piggy tray also. I like to do, especially because of the rectangular shape, there's a little bit of dead space. I don't want to overdo it. I just want to add just a little bit. As I'm putting tape over freshly painted areas, even though it's ink, I do take the blow dryer and make sure that it's good and dry before applying that tape. So the same thing, this is just going to get 2 smaller stripes, and as you see, I just have that little bit of spacing in between, and I'm going to kind of guesstimate another little small stripe. Then after I made sure that my ink is good and dry, I'm going to go ahead and seal this in just using some polycrylic. You know, a lot of times these are decor pieces, but you never know if somebody will put a plant, anything that might get wet on there. And I'm taking the air compressor and making sure that any of those where some of that paper got stuck in the corners, I just want to make sure, especially before spraying polycrylic to seal it all in, that all that paper has been removed. My final step on these pieces is just take a little bit of steel wool, make sure that there's no texture left from the polycrylic and where that image was transferred over, taking that air compressor, and I'm going to take a little bit of the Varathane Natural Clear Wax, and that's just going to give these white trays just one more level of protection. Lianep for asking me to collab with you on this thrift farmhouse flip. And as always, yep, her channel is down in my description box along with her video of what she thrifted and is flipping into farmhouse. So don't forget to check that out. And if you're new to her channel and from hopping over from my channel, please give me a shout out so she knows that you are new in the comment area. So again, thanks for watching today's video, guys. And if I have inspired you in any way to look at thrift store finds in a new way, give me a quick comment and a like if you so feel inclined. And if you're new and you're checking out this channel for the first time and you liked what you saw, please hit that subscription button along with the notification bell so you know when we've uploaded a new video, and we will see you next time, guys, and you can see what we're up to. Bye!